This is my assignment for Psych 516, the midterm oral examination for the course Industrial and Organizational Psychology. Starting with Chapter 1, the question is, how have recent historical events affected the course of research in organizational psychology? Give an example of an event and the resulting outcome. Starting in 1900, the development of growth of scientific management, the theory of Taylor, has influenced business and has been the scientific study of organizational structure. Thus, Weber comes to our aid as well. From the 1920s to the 1930s, we find that the Hawthorne studies, the growth in unionization, immunization, the immigration of Kurt Lewin to the United States also had an influence in organizations. The stock market crash in 1929 also influenced the dealings of business, the psychology of workers, and the Hawthorne studies, Frederick Taylor, and with the advancement of Weber's thesis, all had early contributions to the industrial and psychological movement in business and in technology. Moving further, during World War II, 1940 through 1950, there were documents written, there were books written that helped to usher in more of a understanding of business and how it related to the psyche of individuals working in the industry of both private and public business, respectively. During the 1960s and 70s, the United States was involved in Vietnam, and it increased the possibility of the work-family conflict, many veterans coming home from the Vietnam War were then strung out on drugs, the homelessness, and the inability to have an individual to get a job was difficult after the Vietnam War. During the 1980s and 90s, there was an increase in globalization of the economy. And the advancement of the international, we had the IT advancement, information technology. Coming in then to 2000 and 2010, there were advancements in communications technology and advancements in globalization, with the work and non-work since that became less clear, it created more ambiguity in the workplace itself. From 2010 to the present, Jext and Brent in our text for the course reminds us that there has been a greater focus on the retirement process and the rapid aging of individuals leaving the marketplace to retire, created, as it were, the difficulties of individuals making themselves available to the technology. Those that were once in the workplace now had to rely on greater technology, and it created more of a crisis within the workplace itself. The first question asks, what is an example of an event and the resulting outcome? Well, I would think 9/11, 2001 was that event that changed the history of the workplace. It created more of a demand for communications technology. I know, working in the federal government myself, you had the clearances, you had access or less access to workplaces. You had to have your clearance, had to be in order. If not, then you were not able to get to where you needed to be. Also, organizational policy. organizations became top heavy as a result of 911 with organizational policies. Then finally, 911 impacted the employee attitudes. People became more anxious. They became more worried about whether or not they would be, if you will, blown to smithereens, if you will, as a result of 9/11. Question 2 comes from Chapter 3. Describe the socialization process for graduate students in your program. Is the program successful in socializing newcomers and creating job embeddedness? Several things come to the fore. In Liberty University, in the Applied Psychology program, MA, it seems as though Liberty does a pretty good job in recruiting. So the application of the recruiting process, financial check-in, making course content available, staying active in the course, has created, if you will, a desire for other persons outside of the school environment to become a part of the Liberty process. Thus, recruiting new students on learning on the discussion boards, the Blackboard, created opportunities for growth for students coming into the Liberty program, and then it created also a morale, a high morale, a possibility of getting a graduate degree from a prestigious university. From Chapter 3, there were 6 dimensions that have to do with the socialization process of any organization. A student should know, or a person should know about their organization or the history of it. So when one knows about the history of where I work at the United States Coast Guard with Homeland Security, we were taught, we had an in-brief where we learned about the Coast Guard, the history of the Coast Guard. Secondly, we learned the language or the nomenclature, the wording, the words that mean certain things to that particular area of the workplace. So when you know the language, you know the history, you go thirdly to the politics, knowing what will work and what will not, the customs and courtesies of an organization. Fourthly, we know about the people. The socialization has to do with the people. Getting to know the important people, those that are in management, those that are in middle management, and the line worker, the worker that creates for him or herself networks, so that if the immediate supervisor is not there, a coworker that may know more than you can help you to understand and to be successful on the job itself. Fifthly, in the socialization process, individuals should know the goals and the values of that organization. Whether it's at Liberty University as a student, Dr. Falwell and Dr. Falwell Jr. back in 1971 came up with the theme of Champions for Christ, creating champions for Christ. That is, the student being socialized into the Liberty University campus and matriculating in the program will find him or herself being trained to be a champion for the cause of Christ, for the cause of Calvary and for the church in general, and to be able, sixthly, to have a proficient performance to represent not only Liberty University, but to represent oneself in the larger community. The third question comes from Chapter 4. How can an organization reduce or prevent work-family conflict? This is a difficult scenario for any organization, as work-family conflict will occur if it is not treated fairly and treated correctly. First of all, the individual needs to know that there is, or should know that there is organizational support that is available. If that individual does not know that there should be individual support, then management or the immediate management should be able to then help that individual to get through the stress and the strain, the push and pull of that particular work scenario that may be causing some problems, or at home when there's conflict, to come to the job and then not to be able to produce. Secondly, supervision should be able to create, if you will, some on-site help, if you will, albeit if they're children, it could be on-site. If there's a single parent, there could be on-site daycare, telework policies, individuals to keep a person from increasing in absenteeism, to give them the chance to work in terms of the telework policy. And then thirdly, to be able to know that there is an empathetic and sympathetic supervisory support. Individuals knowing that the supervision is in their corner, ultimately to be a productive person for that particular job, will create, if you will, a more productive, more happy, more well-adjusted person at work, and to be able to get along with coworkers and to produce something that will benefit both organization and that individual as a productive citizen of that particular job. The fourth question comes from chapter 5. Imagine you have been asked to develop a performance assessment program for employee development. What techniques could you use to adequately evaluate employee performances as comprehensively as possible? And Murphy, the theorist, could be used as an example, and that is what I'll use. Murphy, his theory, the model that comes from the job performance according to the in-role, extra-role distinction, he has 4 distinctions. So then the performance dimensions, number 1, the in-role, task-oriented behaviors will be described as performing major tasks associated with the job. When an individual feels very comfortable in the role of that particular task, that person will achieve and hold the standard of that section very high to yield good results. The extra role in interpersonally oriented behaviors, that's the description. It's the all interpersonal transactions that occur on the job. Thirdly, downtime behaviors described as behaviors outside of work that affect job performance, such as things such as alcohol, drug abuse, violence. You have domestic violence. If one thing is not working at work, then it will also impact what is going on at work. And finally, according to Murphy's job performance model, if you will, is the destructive, hazardous behaviors. If things are not working, thus we go back to the work-family conflict theory. If things are not working well at home, they're going to influence the job. If things are not going well on the job, if there's stress on the job, if there's not an empathetic supervisor on the job, if people are arguing on the line, then we're going to have destructive and hazardous behaviors. Thus, it may yield safety violations, absenteeism, sabotage, accidents, and just a bit of crisis, no matter how one may slice it. It may be a very destructive community. Finally, the last question that comes from the midterm oral assignment is from chapter 6. What are some possible common organizational constraints, and how could they lead to counterproductive behavior? Well, immediately, when employees are frustrated, when employees are not happy with their work environment, for example, if they have little or no control over a situation, if the equipment doesn't work, if the computer is always on the fritz, if human relations never gets back to them, if they have a supervisor who is contrary to their basic needs, then it will create what is known as a destructive behavior complex. And these constraints then will lead to counterproductive behavior. And here in the Aberdeen, Maryland area, just a few days ago where I live, a young lady was an active shooter. It is said that she had a lot of these situations going on her job. And as a result, she ended up taking the lives of her co-workers. And as a result, she ended up taking her own life because of conflicts on the job and discontent outside of the job. Conversely, if there are individuals who have a sense of, I wouldn't say entitlement, but a sense of achievement, if they are in a position where they feel like they can achieve and they are getting the things that they need from management, if they're put in positions of responsibility or greater responsibility, then they will have what is known as a high control, which will lead then to constructive behavior. And I think ultimately the writer in our textbook in this course insinuates that individuals who find themselves on high control are those that are taking advantage of the company's resources, those resources that are available to that individual and really to everybody, and they take advantage of them. I think when individuals have a crisis, and we all do, then companies need to advertise that so that individuals will not engage in what is known as counterproductive behavior. I do want to go back to one of my questions and then elaborate on the job embeddedness, and to define at least embeddedness in chapter 3, question 2, that embeddedness is the degree to which employees feel connected to others that they are working with and their ability to fit in. So that has, again, going back to the socialization issue, when one feels as though they are part of the team, they will engage in productive activity. And it does have a connection to chapter 6, that when one feels a part of the team, then there is a sense of connectivity, that everything that affects one directly will affect them indirectly. And if an individual does not feel that in that matrix, ultimately what happens is counterproductive behavior occurs, and that individual will have affective outcomes that will be detrimental to the organization in general and to that individual in particular. When one realizes then ultimately throughout this whole midterm assessment or assignment, it all boils down to this, that the individual employee needs to realize that there are resources upon which they can reach out and to take advantage of, and to be a successful, happy, and productive employee of that organization. This ends my midterm assignment.